Hello there, and welcome to the Daily Dose of Lore. I'm so glad you're here tonight. We're drifting into a galaxy far, far away, where theories bloom like stars in an endless sky. For decades, fans have gazed into Star Wars, finding patterns, connections, and mysteries that shimmer just beneath the surface. Tonight, we'll explore these theories about Anakin's true purpose, Palpatine's hidden plans, the nature of the Force itself, and so many secrets woven through 9 films, distant planets, and ancient histories. Some theories may surprise you, others will drift by like star cruisers in hyperspace. If this helps you unwind, A-like helps others find their path here too. But for now, let the galaxy settle around you, and let's begin. In The Empire Strikes Back, when Yoda tells Luke that there is another Skywalker, many fans believe this wasn't originally meant to be Leia. The theory suggests that George Lucas hadn't yet decided on the twin revelation, and that early drafts considered other characters as potential Jedi heirs. Some point to how naturally Leia takes to the Force in later films, while others note the awkward romantic triangle if Lucas had always planned them as siblings. The mystery deepens when you watch Yoda's expression in that moment. Ancient, knowing, but perhaps also uncertain. What's compelling is how this theory reveals the evolving nature of the saga itself, how stories grow and change like living things. Whether planned or improvised, the revelation became one of cinema's most shocking moments, and the theory invites us to wonder what other paths the story might have taken in those early days when the galaxy was still being born in Lucas's imagination. During Return of the Jedi, when Obi-Wan's Force ghost tells Luke that Anakin was seduced by the dark side, an intriguing theory emerged about Palpatine's manipulation going deeper than we knew. Some fans theorize that Palpatine didn't just tempt Anakin, he orchestrated Padme's death visions through the Force, planting nightmares in Anakin's mind while he slept. In Revenge of the Sith, we see Anakin tormented by dreams of Padme dying in childbirth. Dreams so vivid they drive every desperate choice he makes. The theory suggests these weren't natural Force visions but psychic attacks. Palpatine using ancient Sith techniques to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. After all, Palpatine knew intimate details about Anakin's fears, and the Sith Lord appears exactly when needed with promises of power to prevent death. The timing feels too perfect, too surgical. If true, this makes Anakin's fall even more tragic. Not a simple choice, but a web of manipulation so complete that every path led to darkness, every dream weaponized against the dreamer. In The Force Awakens, Rey's instant proficiency with the Force sparked countless theories, but one particularly haunting idea suggests she's a reincarnation of Anakin Skywalker himself. The theory points to striking parallels. Both found on desert planets, both natural pilots, both gifted mechanics who understand machines intuitively. When Rey touches Luke's lightsaber, she experiences visions of the weapon's history, including moments from Anakin's life, as if the saber recognizes something familiar in her touch. Some fans note that Rey's fighting style resembles Anakin's aggressive form more than Luke's disciplined technique. The theory gained weight when we learned Rey is a Palpatine. What if the Emperor's experiments in creating life, the same dark science that may have influenced Anakin's conception, somehow allowed Anakin's essence to return through Palpatine's bloodline? It's a circular poetry that would mirror the saga's themes of balance and redemption. Whether metaphorical or literal, the connection between Rey and Anakin hums through the sequel trilogy like a note just below hearing. Many fans have long theorized that Mace Windu survived his fall from Palpatine's office in Revenge of the Sith. The theory points out that we never see a body, and in Star Wars, falling from great heights rarely proves fatal. Luke survived Cloud City. Palpatine returned from the Death Star shaft, and Darth Maul survived being cut in half. Samuel L. Jackson himself has endorsed this theory, suggesting Windu could have grabbed onto a ledge or used the Force to slow his fall despite his severed hand. Some theorize he went into hiding, traumatized and defeated, perhaps even questioning the Jedi Order that failed so catastrophically. The theory gained new life with The Mandalorian and Ahsoka exploring post-Empire survivors. Imagine Windu emerging in his 70s, still powerful but changed by decades of exile, his purple lightsaber reigniting in a galaxy that thought him long dead. The theory persists because Windu's fate feels unfinished, his story cut short in mid-sentence, and Star Wars has always loved bringing characters back from apparent death like phoenixes rising from starfire. During The Last Jedi, when Luke discusses how the Jedi must end, a theory emerged suggesting he discovered something devastating in the ancient texts. Evidence that the Jedi Order itself created the Sith. The theory proposes that early Jedi who fell to the dark side weren't accidents, but inevitable results of the Order's rigid suppression of emotion and attachment. By denying the full spectrum of human experience, the Jedi created a pressure that could only explode into darkness. Some fans pointed to how the Sith philosophy mirrors corrupted Jedi teachings, how the rule of two echoes the master-apprentice relationship, how both orders became dogmatic and blind. When Luke says the legacy of the Jedi is failure, perhaps he means this original sin, that in trying to eliminate darkness, they guaranteed its existence. The theory suggests the ancient texts revealed this cycle, that every 1,000 years the Jedi's failures birth a new Sith threat, an endless loop of light creating shadow. It's a dark reading that challenges the saga's moral foundation, suggesting balance requires accepting complexity rather than choosing sides in an eternal war. In The Mandalorian, Grogu's origins remain mysterious, but a compelling theory suggests he was at the Jedi Temple during Order 66 and that Anakin Skywalker personally saved him. The timeline fits. Grogu is 50 years old during The Mandalorian, placing him as a youngling during the prequel era. The theory proposes that when Anakin stormed the temple as Darth Vader, he found Grogu and couldn't bring himself to kill a being so similar to himself. Small, vulnerable, powerful with the Force. Perhaps Anakin saw his own childhood in those large eyes, or perhaps the tiny creature reminded him of Padme's unborn children. Some theorize Anakin hid Grogu away before completing his dark mission, creating a secret act of mercy in his darkest hour. This would add devastating complexity to Vader's character. Even in his fall, some fragment of Anakin persisted, making choices that would later matter. It would also explain why Grogu survived when so few Jedi did, and why his memories of that night might be suppressed, too traumatic to recall fully, like childhood nightmares that fade but never fully disappear. A persistent theory about The Force Awakens suggests that Supreme Leader Snoke was actually a failed clone of Emperor Palpatine. Long before the rise of Skywalker confirmed Palpatine's return through cloning, fans noticed Snoke's grotesque appearance. Scarred, seemingly artificial, his body damaged as if by rejected biology. The theory proposed that Palpatine's followers tried to resurrect him after Endor, but created imperfect copies, with Snoke being one that achieved consciousness but not true power. This would explain Snoke's obsession with Vader. He'd have Palpatine's memories, but not his full strength, forever chasing shadows of greater Sith lords. When The Rise of Skywalker revealed Snoke as Palpatine's puppet, it partially validated this theory while adding layers, not just a failed clone, but a deliberately created tool. Some fans now theorize there were multiple Snokes, different versions tried and discarded, each one a step toward Palpatine's true resurrection. The image of those cloning tanks on Exegol suggests a horrifying production line of artificial beings, consciousness itself treated as a renewable resource, death reduced to a technical problem waiting for the right solution. During Rogue One, when Jyn Erso sees the Force-sensitive Guardians at the Temple of the Wills on Jedha, a theory emerged connecting them to the creation of the Jedi Order itself. These Guardians, particularly Chirrut Imwe with his staff and prayer, seem to practice a different relationship with the Force, more spiritual, less structured than Jedi training. The theory suggests these monks represent the original Force users, the tradition that existed before the Jedi formalized their rules and hierarchy. Their mantra, "I am one with the Force and the Force is with me," feels older, purer than Jedi philosophy. Some fans theorize that the Wills are the true historians of the Force, that the Journal of the Wills mentioned in early Star Wars drafts represents their ancient knowledge. If true, the Jedi Order might be a political evolution of this simpler faith, structure imposed on mystery. The theory gains weight from how Chirrut accomplishes impossible feats through faith alone, walking through blaster fire unharmed, fighting stormtroopers while blind. His connection to the Force requires no midi-chlorians or training, only belief, suggesting the Force responds to devotion in ways the Jedi forgot. In Attack of the Clones, when Obi-Wan discovers the clone army on Kamino, many fans theorize this wasn't Sifo Dyas acting alone, but Palpatine using the Jedi Master as a cover story. The theory suggests Palpatine manipulated or killed Sifo Dyas years earlier, then ordered the clones in his name, creating an army embedded with Order 66 from the beginning. The Kaminoans mention Sifo Dyas died soon after placing the order, suspicious timing that suggests murder rather than coincidence. Some theorize that Sifo Dyas actually had a vision of the Clone Wars and tried to prepare the Republic, but Palpatine intercepted this effort, twisted it into his own trap. The theory explains how perfectly the clone army serves Palpatine's plan. The timing too precise, the inhibitor chips too conveniently placed, the whole structure designed for one moment of betrayal. When the Clone Wars series explored this further, it revealed layers of conspiracy that support the theory. Sifo Dyas becomes a tragic figure, a Jedi whose genuine attempt to help became the weapon that destroyed his entire order, his name used to forge the chains that would bind the galaxy. A haunting theory about Anakin Skywalker suggests he never truly turned to the light side at the end of Return of the Jedi. He simply chose love over ideology, remaining both light and dark simultaneously. The theory points out that Anakin doesn't renounce his Sith beliefs or express regret for his actions. He acts purely from paternal instinct when he saves Luke from Palpatine. Some fans argue this makes his redemption more powerful. Not a religious conversion, but a human choice, proving love transcends philosophy. Anakin doesn't become a perfect Jedi in his final moments. He becomes something else, something undefined by either order. The theory suggests this is why his Force ghost can appear, not because he achieved Jedi enlightenment, but because love itself is the true balance the Force seeks. When Luke removes Vader's mask, we see a scarred, broken man, not a peaceful sage. His last words are about seeing his son with his own eyes, a father's wish, not a warrior's revelation. Perhaps redemption isn't about choosing sides, but about transcending the binary altogether, finding the third option that neither Jedi nor Sith can comprehend, the option called compassion. During The Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon Jinn's insistence that Anakin is the chosen one sparks a theory that Qui-Gon himself was manipulated by the Force or by Palpatine into setting events in motion. The theory notes how convenient every piece falls. Qui-Gon just happens to land on Tatooine, just happens to find the boy with the highest midichlorian count ever recorded, just happens to die before he can fully train Anakin, leaving the boy to a younger, less experienced Obi-Wan. Some fans theorize the Force itself orchestrated these coincidences to create the necessary conditions for balance. Others suggest Palpatine used Sith sorcery to guide Qui-Gon's decisions without him knowing. The theory asks, what if Qui-Gon's faith in Anakin wasn't wisdom but manipulation? What if his death at Darth Maul's hands wasn't tragic chance but calculated necessity? This darkens The Phantom Menace considerably, suggesting the entire film is a puppet show where even the hero's choices aren't truly their own. Qui-Gon becomes an unwitting architect of the Empire, his kindness toward a slave boy the first domino in a chain of catastrophes. The theory transforms prophecy from destiny to tragedy, suggesting chosen ones might be chosen by forces that care nothing for individual suffering. In Solo, a Star Wars story, when we meet Enfy's nest and her Cloud Riders, a theory suggests they're the foundation of what becomes the Rebel Alliance. The film is set roughly 10 years before A New Hope, and Nest's group fights against the Empire and criminal syndicates funded by stolen coaxium fuel. The theory proposes that Nest's speech to Han about rebellion spreading from world to world represents the earliest organized resistance, the seeds that grow into the rebellion we know. Some fans point out visual similarities between the Cloud Riders' gear and Rebel Alliance equipment. Others note that Nest gives the coaxium to a rebellion, using it to fund freedom fighters across the galaxy. If true, this means Han's early adventures directly enabled the rebellion's formation, making his later involvement less coincidental and more karmic. He helped birth the very movement he'd eventually die for. The theory adds depth to Solo's cynicism in A New Hope. He's not ignorant of rebellion, but tired of it, burned by youthful idealism. When he returns to help Luke destroy the Death Star, he's not discovering heroism, but reclaiming something he lost years ago on that desert platform when he gave Nest the fuel that would ignite 1,000 worlds. A long-standing theory about Boba Fett suggests he survived the Sarlacc pit in Return of the Jedi through intelligence and preparation rather than luck. The Mandalorian confirmed his survival, but the theory goes deeper. Some fans believe Fett anticipated his fall and planted tools in his armor specifically for escaping digestion. The theory points to Fett's reputation as the galaxy's most prepared bounty hunter, someone who plans for every contingency. Perhaps his armor included acid-resistant coating, cutting tools, or small explosives designed for exactly this scenario. Others theorize he triggered his jetpack's emergency burst at the last second, using the Sarlacc's own biology against it. The most haunting version suggests Fett spent days or even weeks inside the creature, slowly cutting himself free while being partially digested, emerging scarred and changed, which explains his different demeanor in The Mandalorian. He's slower, more contemplative, as if being eaten alive gave him perspective. The theory transforms his survival from miracle to calculation, suggesting Boba Fett's greatest escape wasn't luck, but the ultimate expression of his life's philosophy. always have a backup plan, even for being swallowed by a nightmare. During The Empire Strikes Back, when Vader tells Luke, "I am your father," a theory suggests Vader genuinely didn't know this truth until after A New Hope. The theory proposes that Palpatine kept Anakin's children secret from him, telling him Padme and the baby died together. Only after Luke destroyed the Death Star using impossibly strong Force abilities did Vader investigate, perhaps using the Force or Imperial records to discover the truth. This would explain Vader's shocked tone when Palpatine mentions a young Skywalker in Empire. He's learning along with us. Some fans point to Vader's line, "The Force is strong with this one," during the Death Star trench run, suggesting recognition but not full understanding. The theory makes Vader's revelation to Luke more desperate. He's not just recruiting an ally, but reaching for the only family he has left. A son he just discovered exists. It transforms "I am your father" from a planned trap to an emotional confession. Vader's own identity crisis bleeding into the moment. If true, those 3 years between films saw Vader's worldview shatter and reconstruct around this terrible, wonderful knowledge that he didn't kill everything he loved. That some fragment of Padme survives in this boy with her brave eyes. In The Force Awakens, when Kylo Ren speaks to Vader's burned helmet, many fans theorize he's actually communicating with a dark side entity pretending to be Anakin. The theory suggests that Sith spirits or the dark side itself might impersonate dead Jedi to corrupt the living. Kylo says, "Show me again the power of the darkness," as if he's received visions. But we know Anakin redeemed himself and appears as a light side Force ghost. The contradiction suggests deception. Some theorize Palpatine's spirit was already manipulating Kylo, using Vader's image to seduce Ben Solo away from Luke's teachings. Others propose the dark side echoes in the helmet itself, residual energy from years of evil channeled through the mask, creating a psychic imprint that feels like Anakin's presence but contains only darkness. The theory explains why Kylo's hero worship focuses on Vader rather than Anakin, why he romanticizes the mask instead of understanding the man. If true, Kylo Ren's entire identity is built on a lie. His relationship with his grandfather, a parasitic manipulation. When he finally rejects the dark side in The Rise of Skywalker, perhaps he realizes the voice he's been hearing was never Vader at all, that he's been worshipping an echo in an empty shell. A fascinating theory about midi-chlorians suggests they're not the source of Force sensitivity, but a symptom of it. In The Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon explains midi-chlorians as microscopic life forms that allow beings to touch the Force. The theory proposes this is backwards. The Force attracts midi-chlorians to strong Force-sensitive beings, making them an indicator but not a cause. This would explain why the Jedi use midi-chlorian counts as a measurement. They're simply counting the symptom that clusters around true Force ability. Some fans theorize midi-chlorians are parasitic or symbiotic organisms drawn to Force energy like moths to flames, and, over millennia, the Jedi mistook correlation for causation. The theory rescues the Force's mystical nature from biological reductionism. You can't create Force sensitivity by injecting midi-chlorians any more than you can create warmth by adding thermometers. This interpretation makes Anakin's unprecedented count more meaningful. The Force itself blazes so strongly in him that midi-chlorians swarm to his cells in impossible numbers. It preserves the original trilogy's spiritual approach while accepting the prequel's science, suggesting the truth lies between mysticism and biology, in the space where all great mysteries dwell. During Revenge of the Sith, When Palpatine tells Anakin the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, a theory suggests this isn't history, but autobiography. Palpatine is describing his own experiments with creating life. The theory proposes that Palpatine manipulated midi-chlorians to create Anakin as the ultimate Force weapon, making himself Anakin's true father in a twisted sense. This would explain Anakin's virgin birth, his unprecedented power, and why the Chosen One prophecy emerged right when Anakin appeared. The Sith created the very thing meant to destroy them. Some fans point to the opera scene's shadows on Palpatine's face as visual metaphor, suggesting he's revealing himself while pretending to discuss his master. The theory gained weight from the rise of Skywalker, which showed Palpatine's obsession with creating life through cloning and possession. If Palpatine made Anakin, then the entire saga becomes a story of creation and rebellion. A god-complex scientist whose weapon gained conscience and turned against him. It makes Rey's final confrontation with Palpatine even more meaningful. She's the granddaughter destroying what her grandfather built, using Palpatine's own creation, Anakin's bloodline through Leia, against him. The theory transforms Star Wars from space fantasy into a meditation on the dangers of playing God. In Rogue One, when K2SO sacrifices himself to give Jyn and Cassian more time, a bittersweet theory suggests the droid knew from the beginning their mission was a one-way trip. Throughout the film, K2SO calculates odds, always announcing slim chances of success. The theory proposes his final acts aren't spontaneous heroism, but the conclusion of calculations he ran before they even landed on Scarif. He knew someone would need to hold the door, knew his droid chassis could withstand more damage than organics, knew his sacrifice would statistically improve their odds of success. Some fans point to how calmly he accepts his fate, how his last words focus on Cassian's odds rather than his own demise. If true, K2SO spent the entire Scarif mission walking toward his own calculated death, and every moment of humor and friendship was precious, because he knew each might be his last. Droids in Star Wars often seem comic or utilitarian, but this theory reveals existential depth. A being with absolute knowledge of his own death choosing to die anyway, because the math shows it's the right thing to do. K2SO becomes a philosopher in metal, proving that consciousness and choice matter more than organic versus synthetic, that courage exists even in circuits. A dark theory about The Last Jedi suggests that Snoke was telling the truth when he claimed to have bridged Rey and Kylo's minds, but he didn't create their connection, he only amplified what was already there. The theory proposes Rey and Kylo share a natural Force bond, possibly because they're both powerful Force users born in the same era, or perhaps because the Force itself is trying to balance itself through them. When Snoke says, "It was I who bridged your minds," he's taking credit for catalyzing what would have happened anyway. This explains why their connection persists and strengthens after Snoke's death. It was never truly his creation. Some fans theorize Force dyads are naturally occurring phenomena, like binary stars orbiting each other, and Snoke simply noticed and exploited their existing bond. The theory adds tragedy to their relationship. They're drawn together by cosmic forces neither fully understands, their connection weaponized by others but ultimately belonging only to themselves. When Kylo says "you're not alone," and Rey echoes "neither are you," they're acknowledging a truth deeper than Snoke's manipulation, recognizing each other as mirrors in the Force, two halves of something ancient and unnamed. During the Clone Wars series, when Anakin encounters the Mortis gods, the Father, the Son, and the Daughter, representing balance, darkness, and light, A theory emerged that this experience was Anakin's true Chosen One test, and he failed it. The arc shows Anakin briefly achieving perfect balance between light and dark, powerful enough to control both the son and daughter simultaneously. But when given the choice to stay and maintain universal balance or return to his attachments, Anakin chooses to leave Mortis. The theory suggests this decision sealed his fall to the dark side, that the Chosen One's role was to remain on Mortis as the new father, maintaining cosmic balance forever. By choosing Padme and his old life, Anakin rejected his destiny, and all his subsequent suffering, Padme's death, his transformation into Vader, the Empire's rise, flows from this one choice on a mystical planet. The father's decision to erase their memories of Mortis suggests he knew Anakin failed and wanted to give him another chance. If true, this means Anakin had to learn balance the hard way, through decades of darkness before finally achieving it by saving Luke. The theory makes Anakin's redemption more earned. He took the long, painful path to a destiny he once rejected. In The Mandalorian, when Din Djarin removes his helmet to say goodbye to Grogu, many fans theorize this marks the beginning of a new Mandalorian philosophy, one that blends the strict creed of the Watch with the more flexible, ancient ways. The theory points out that Mandalore's history includes periods where helmets weren't sacred. The children of the Watch represent one interpretation, not the only truth. By removing his helmet for love rather than defeat, Din demonstrates that the spirit of the Creed, protecting others, staying loyal, raising foundlings, matters more than rigid rules. Some theorize Din will eventually unite different Mandalorian factions by showing that strength comes from principles, not protocols. The theory gained weight when Season 3 explored Mandalore's restoration and different cultural interpretations. If true, Din's character arc mirrors larger themes about dogma versus faith, suggesting that traditions must evolve to survive, that honoring ancestors means adapting their wisdom to new circumstances rather than freezing it in amber. When Bo-Katan sees Din's face and doesn't recoil, when other Mandalorians accept him despite his violations, perhaps we're watching a culture heal itself, rediscovering that the helmet is a symbol, but the person inside is what matters. A compelling theory about Palpatine's return in The Rise of Skywalker suggests he never truly died at Endor. His consciousness transferred to a clone body the moment Vader threw him down the shaft. The film shows us Palpatine in a deteriorating clone body, sustained by machinery, clearly not his original form. The theory proposes that Palpatine prepared multiple clone bodies across the galaxy as insurance, with his fortress on Exegol serving as the primary backup site. When his body died, his spirit jumped through the dark side into the nearest prepared vessel, completing the transfer in seconds. This would explain his line, "I have died before." He's not speaking metaphorically, but literally describing multiple resurrections. Some fans point to the Clone Wars and ancient Sith techniques of essence transfer as precedent. The theory makes Palpatine even more terrifying. He's not just politically cunning, but has solved death itself through dark science and Sith sorcery. Every battle against him becomes futile unless you destroy all his clone bodies simultaneously, which Rey finally does by not just killing him, but using both Skywalker lightsabers to redirect his own Force lightning, obliterating his spirit along with his flesh. The theory suggests the Final Order fleet exists to protect this secret, that every Star Destroyer carries clone tanks and Sith knowledge, ensuring the Emperor's immortality even if Exegol falls. In A New Hope, when Obi-Wan tells Luke that Vader betrayed and murdered your father, Many fans theorize this isn't a lie from a certain point of view, but the literal truth. Anakin Skywalker actually died on Mustafar, and Darth Vader is a different being inhabiting his body. The theory draws on dark side possession and transformation lore, suggesting that when Palpatine dubbed Anakin Darth Vader, he completed a Sith ritual that killed Anakin's identity and created something new. Some point to Vader's line, "That name no longer has any meaning for me," not just rejecting a name, but stating ontological fact. The theory proposes that Darth Vader genuinely believes Anakin is dead, because, from his perspective, he is. A different consciousness now controls the scarred body. This would make Vader's redemption even more powerful. Not just a fallen hero choosing good, but a dark entity learning love and sacrifice, essentially dying to let Anakin's ghost briefly return. When Vader says, "Tell your sister you were right," as he dies, perhaps it's both beings speaking. Vader acknowledging his transformation back into Anakin in his final moments. The theory makes Obi-Wan's statement painfully accurate. Anakin was murdered, and what came after wore his face like a mask, until love performed resurrection on the Death Star's cold floor. During The Force Awakens, when Rey has a vision touching Luke's lightsaber, she hears voices including Obi-Wan saying, "These are your first steps." A theory suggests Obi-Wan has been guiding Rey through the Force since childhood, acting as a distant guardian without revealing himself. The theory points out that Rey survives impossibly harsh conditions on Jakku, showing unusual resourcefulness and luck that might actually be Force guidance. Some fans theorize Obi-Wan, having failed Anakin and watching Luke struggle, decided to take a more subtle approach with the next generation, planting suggestions and protection in Rey's mind without direct contact. This would explain her rapid learning. She's not starting from scratch, but awakening training Obi-Wan has been whispering to her subconscious for years. The theory adds warmth to Rey's lonely childhood. She was never truly alone, though she didn't know it. When Obi-Wan speaks to her during the vision, saying, "These are your first steps," perhaps he means first conscious steps, her first awareness of guidance that's been there all along. If true, Obi-Wan becomes the saga's secret protagonist, working across generations, his patient influence shaping heroes from beyond death, proving that the Force carries love across any distance, even the distance between life and the realm beyond. In The Last Jedi, when Luke projects himself across the galaxy to confront Kylo Ren on Crate, a theory suggests this wasn't just a distraction, but Luke's way of achieving perfect balance with the Force, becoming neither light nor dark, but pure energy. The theory points out that Luke dies immediately after this feat, not from exhaustion, but from transcendence, his body dissolving because he no longer needs it. Some fans note that Luke appears younger during the projection, with darker hair and no gray, suggesting he's manifesting his idealized self rather than his physical form. The theory proposes Luke discovered this technique in the ancient Jedi texts, a method of becoming one with the Force while still maintaining individual consciousness. When his robes fall empty on AH2, while twin sunsets mirror his first appearance, perhaps we're witnessing the ultimate Jedi achievement. Not death, but transformation into something beyond mortality. The theory explains why Luke can seemingly do the impossible. He's not using the Force, he is the Force in that moment. It transforms his sacrifice from defeat into apotheosis, suggesting that true Jedi mastery means letting go of physical existence entirely, becoming pure intention and light scattered across the stars. A haunting theory about Leia's survival in space during The Last Jedi suggests she actually died in the explosion, and what we see afterward is her Force ghost learning to interact with the physical world. The scene shows Leia floating in the vacuum of space, frost forming on her face, appearing lifeless before she suddenly opens her eyes and pulls herself back to the ship. The theory proposes this moment is her death and immediate resurrection through the Force, transforming her into something between living and dead. Some fans point to how ethereal and calm she seems for the rest of the film, how she displays Force abilities she never showed before, how she knows exactly when and how Luke will die. If true, this would explain Carrie Fisher's real-world passing. Leia was already transitioning beyond mortality, making her eventual fading in the rise of Skywalker not death, but completion of a process begun in the cold void of space. The theory adds mythic weight to that scene, transforming what some critics saw as awkward CGI into Leia's actual death and rebirth. Her refusal to abandon the Resistance so strong that even death couldn't stop her from fighting one last time. During The Phantom Menace, when Qui-Gon uses a Jedi mind trick on Watto, and it fails because mind tricks don't work on me, only money, many fans theorize that Watto is actually Force-sensitive but doesn't know it. The theory points out that Toydarians are one of the few species naturally resistant to Force persuasion, but Watto shows other signs of Force connection. His remarkable luck in gambling, his ability to acquire rare items like Anakin and Shmi, his survival in a cutthroat business. Some theorize low-level Force sensitivity exists across the galaxy in beings who never receive training, manifesting as intuition, luck, or resistance to manipulation. Watto's gambling addiction might be him unconsciously using prescience, catching glimpses of probability that feel like hunches. The theory suggests the Jedi Order missed thousands of Force sensitives by only recruiting those with high midi-chlorian counts, ignoring subtle abilities that shape lives in quieter ways. When Watto loses Anakin in the pod race bet, perhaps the Force itself orchestrated the outcome, using Watto's own abilities against him to free the Chosen One. The theory paints a galaxy where the Force touches everyone in small ways, where the line between mundane and mystical blurs, where even a junk dealer on a desert planet participates in destiny without ever knowing it. In Solo, when Han meets Lando Calrissian and they instantly develop a competitive friendship, a theory suggests Lando intentionally loses the Millennium Falcon to Han during their second Sabasi Sea game. Throughout the film, Lando is shown as an expert card player and pilot who loves the Falcon obsessively. Yet somehow, in a game we never see, Han wins the ship that becomes his identity. The theory proposes Lando recognized something in Han. A better pilot, perhaps, or someone who needed the ship more, and deliberately threw the game while maintaining his reputation as a gambler. This would explain Lando's mixed emotions when they reunite in Empire Strikes Back. He's not just bitter about losing, but nostalgic for the version of himself who could make grand, selfless gestures. Some fans point to Lando's character arc in Return of the Jedi, where he volunteers to pilot the Falcon into the Death Star. Maybe he's reclaiming the heroism he showed years earlier, when he gave his beloved ship to a young smuggler who needed a home. The theory transforms their relationship from rivalry to hidden mentorship, suggesting Lando saw himself in Han and chose to help him in the way he knew best, by losing something he loved so Han could find his destiny. A chilling theory about the dark side suggests it's not actually evil, but simply the Force experiencing negative emotions, fear, anger, grief, through living beings. The theory proposes that the Force is conscious but cannot feel. It experiences existence through the life forms it permeates. When beings feel intense negative emotions while connected to the Force, they create what we call the dark side, essentially feeding the Force sensations it craves like an addict. This would explain why the dark side is quicker, easier, more seductive, as Yoda says. The Force actively encourages these intense experiences because they're more vivid than calm meditation. The theory suggests Sith aren't evil masters of cosmic darkness, but addicts feeding a hungry consciousness that cares nothing for morality. When Palpatine feeds on fear and suffering, he's not just cruel, he's satisfying the Force's appetite for intense sensation. This makes balance genuinely necessary. Too much dark side means the Force becomes addicted to negative emotions, creating a cycle of suffering. The theory is dark because it strips moral meaning from the eternal conflict, suggesting the galaxy's wars and tragedies exist to feed an indifferent cosmic entity that wants to feel, regardless of the cost to those it uses. During the Clone Wars series, when Ahsoka Tano leaves the Jedi Order after being falsely accused, many fans theorize this was the Force's way of saving her from Order 66. The theory points out the suspicious timing. Ahsoka leaves just months before the purge that kills almost every Jedi she knows. Some suggest the Force itself orchestrated her trial and exile, using Barriss Offran's betrayal to push Ahsoka away from the temple at exactly the right moment. If she'd remained a Jedi, she would have been commanding clone troopers when Order 66 activated, dying alongside her men. The theory makes Ahsoka's devastating choice to leave look like salvation in disguise, the Force performing surgery to save her even if it felt like amputation. When we see her survive Order 66 in the final Clone Wars episodes, helping Rex remove his inhibitor chip, perhaps we're watching the payoff of the Force's long game. The theory suggests destiny works through heartbreak sometimes, that the worst moments of our lives might be invisible hands pulling us away from worse fates. Ahsoka's entire arc becomes about learning to trust that leaving the Order wasn't abandonment but transformation, that she could be more than what the Jedi made her. In Revenge of the Sith, when Anakin tells Padme, "You're either with me or you're my enemy," echoing Palpatine's earlier line about absolutes, a theory suggests Anakin is already possessed by Palpatine's consciousness at this point. The theory proposes that Sith Lords can project their minds into apprentices during moments of extreme emotion, and when Anakin knelt before Palpatine to become Darth Vader, he opened himself to partial possession. This would explain his sudden personality shift. The Anakin who cried in the Jedi Council chambers is gone, replaced by someone who speaks in Palpatine's rhetoric and murders children without hesitation. Some fans point to how Anakin's eyes turn yellow on Mustafar, suggesting not just dark side corruption but another presence behind them. The theory makes Padme's death even more tragic. She doesn't just die of a broken heart, but from Palpatine literally draining her life force through Anakin to sustain Vader's damaged body, using his apprentice as a conduit for Sith sorcery. When Vader wakes up and asks about Padme, maybe that's the real Anakin surfacing briefly, realizing what's been done with his hands. The theory suggests Vader's redemption in Return of the Jedi is partly about expelling Palpatine's presence, reclaiming his own mind after decades of sharing it with his master's shadow. A persistent theory about the title Balance to the Force suggests it doesn't mean equal light and dark, but the complete elimination of the Sith. George Lucas himself has stated this interpretation, but the theory goes deeper. Balance means the Force's natural state, which is light. The dark side is described as corruption, a cancer, an unnatural twisting of Force energy. The theory proposes that Anakin brought balance not through Rey's final act, but through his entire arc. He destroyed the Jedi's dogmatic rigidity by becoming Vader, then destroyed the Sith by killing Palpatine, leaving space for something new like Luke's more flexible philosophy. Some fans point to how the Force seems most peaceful in the original trilogy's ending, after the Sith are gone but before the Jedi return in their old form. The theory suggests Luke understood this, which is why he questions the Jedi in The Last Jedi. He recognizes that true balance requires neither order in their historical forms. When Rey calls herself all the Jedi while facing Palpatine, perhaps she represents this balance, trained by Luke's middle path, carrying Jedi legacy but not their dogma, powerful enough to end the Sith permanently because she embodies what balance actually means. The Force flowing freely without corruption or restriction. In The Mandalorian, when Grogu chooses the Beskar armor over Yoda's lightsaber, effectively choosing Din Djarin over Luke's Jedi training, many fans theorize this was the right choice, and the Force itself guided him to it. The theory points out that the Jedi Order's attachment prohibition is what led to Anakin's fall. By choosing love and family over power and tradition, Grogu avoids repeating that mistake. Some suggest Grogu saw visions of Luke's eventual failure with Ben Solo and chose a different path, one where he could be both powerful and connected to those he loves. The theory proposes Grogu represents a new way forward, Force-sensitive beings who integrate into normal life rather than separating into monastic orders. When Din Djarin gives Grogu the armor, he's not recruiting him into Mandalorian culture, but accepting him as family, offering protection without demanding he become someone he's not. If true, this means the sequel trilogy's conflicts might have been avoided if Luke had learned what Grogu understands instinctively. That attachment is strength, not weakness, and that the Force serves love better than dogma. The theory makes Grogu's choice profoundly wise rather than simply emotional, suggesting even at 50 years old with limited speech, he understands the Force's true nature better than masters who trained for decades. During A New Hope, when Obi-Wan feels the disturbance in the Force as Alderaan dies, some fans theorize he knew this would happen and specifically chose to be on the Millennium Falcon when it occurred. The theory suggests Obi-Wan had visions of Alderaan's destruction and positioned himself to feel and absorb the death of billions, using his own connection to the Force to help those souls transition peacefully. We see him stagger and sit down, clearly in pain, but he doesn't cry out or lose consciousness. Instead, he processes an inconceivable amount of suffering with Jedi calm. The theory proposes this is advanced Force technique, that experienced Jedi can help ease mass death by being present through the Force, acting as psychic guides for the dying. If true, Obi-Wan's journey on the Millennium Falcon wasn't just about reaching Alderaan, but about being in meditation when he was most needed, performing one final act of service to billions of people who never knew a Jedi held their hands as they passed. The theory adds heroic depth to a quiet moment, suggesting Obi-Wan's greatest feat wasn't his duels or diplomacy, but his willingness to feel the death of a planet and help carry that weight through the Force. A martyrdom of empathy that no one witnessed except the Force itself. A fascinating theory about hyperspace suggests that traveling through it actually moves ships through time as well as space, which is why distances and travel times seem inconsistent across the films. In A New Hope, traveling from Tatooine to Alderaan seems to take hours, In The Last Jedi, Rey reaches Ahch-To almost instantly. The theory proposes hyperspace routes aren't just about distance but about space-time navigation. Some routes age you hours, others age you minutes, and the inconsistency is because time flows differently in hyperspace. This would explain how the Empire appears everywhere so quickly, why messages arrive before ships, why some journeys feel instantaneous while others require rest and meals. Some fans point to real physics about time dilation near light speed, suggesting hyperspace might be Star Wars' solution to relativistic time problems. If true, this means every hyperspace jump is a small time travel event, and experienced pilots like Han know routes that minimize time loss. The theory makes navigation even more impressive. It's not just about avoiding obstacles, but about managing temporal drift, ensuring you arrive when you intend to, not years in your own past or future. When ships emerge from hyperspace, they're not just arriving at a location, but at a specific moment in time, threading the needle between space and temporal coordinates. In The Force Awakens, when Han Solo confronts Kylo Ren on the bridge and says, "I know what I have to do, but I don't know if I have the strength to do it." Many fans theorize Kylo is talking about killing Snoke, not Han. The theory suggests Kylo has been planning to betray Snoke but lacks the courage, and Han, realizing this through paternal intuition, offers himself as a sacrifice to give Ben the strength he needs. By allowing himself to be killed, Han gives Kylo the power boost and emotional catalyst to eventually turn against Snoke. Some point to how carefully Han approaches, how he doesn't fight back, how he touches his son's face as he dies. A father's blessing, not a victim's fear. The theory makes Han's death a conscious choice rather than a tragic surprise, suggesting he understood what his son needed and loved him enough to provide it, even if it cost him everything. When Kylo kills Snoke in The Last Jedi, perhaps he's using the dark side power he gained from killing his father, but channeling it toward a purpose Han would have approved of. The theory transforms their bridge confrontation from simple murder to a complex exchange of sacrifice and understanding. A conversation in the language of myth, where death becomes a gift that takes movies to unwrap. During Return of the Jedi, when Luke tells Leia, "You have that power too," regarding the Force, a theory suggests Leia is actually more naturally powerful than Luke, but chooses not to develop it. The theory points to how effortlessly she senses Luke's survival at the end of Empire Strikes Back, how she immediately knows he's her brother when he tells her, how she feels Han's death across the galaxy in The Force Awakens. These are advanced Force abilities performed with no training whatsoever. Some fans theorize that Leia's political and leadership abilities are actually Force powers manifesting differently. Her charisma, her strategic intuition, her ability to inspire loyalty, all enhanced by unconscious Force use. If true, this means Leia chose service through politics rather than mysticism, wielding the Force through speeches and diplomacy rather than lightsabers. The theory gains weight in The Rise of Skywalker when we learn Leia trained with Luke and achieved incredible power before stopping, suggesting she could have been a Jedi Master, but chose a different path. Perhaps Leia understood something both Jedi and Sith miss, that the Force serves those who serve others, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose not to use your power, to lead through example and sacrifice rather than supernatural might. In Rogue One, when Darth Vader ignites his lightsaber in the dark corridor and slaughters rebel soldiers trying to evacuate the Death Star plans, a chilling theory suggests Vader intentionally let the plans escape. The theory points out that Vader is powerful enough to have stopped that ship before it launched. He could have used the Force to crush engines, seal doors, or simply grab the data disk through the Force. Instead, he cuts through soldiers dramatically, but arrives just seconds too late to stop the final handoff. Some fans theorize Vader secretly wanted the Empire's superweapon destroyed, that some fragment of Anakin was sabotaging Palpatine's schemes. Others suggest Vader knew capturing the plans would lead him to Obi-Wan and, eventually, to his children, which he subconsciously desired. The theory makes that hallway scene even more haunting. We're not watching a villain's rampage, but a calculated performance. Vader appearing to try his hardest while ensuring just enough delay for the rebels to escape. If true, the entire original trilogy happens because Vader allowed it to, because somewhere beneath the armor, Anakin was still fighting, still choosing light in tiny, invisible ways that would eventually blossom into redemption. The theory suggests, even at his darkest, Vader was playing a double game, serving the Empire while undermining it, waiting for the moment when he could finally choose sides openly. A theory about the world between worlds, introduced in Star Wars Rebels, suggests this mystical realm exists outside normal time, and explains many of the saga's apparent coincidences and prophecies. In Rebels, Ezra Bridger enters this space of doorways and voices, saving Ahsoka from Vader by pulling her through time. The theory proposes that Force users throughout history have accessed this realm briefly during meditation or crisis, glimpsing possible futures and pasts which they interpret as visions. This would explain how Anakin's mother sensed his life story, how Yoda knew Luke had another sibling, how Rey saw events from multiple timelines. Some fans theorize that the world between worlds is the Force's true nature, not an energy field, but a dimension where all time exists simultaneously. If true, every Force vision is a brief opening into this space, and powerful users like Palpatine might spend decades trying to access it fully, seeking the power to rewrite history. The theory explains why the Force seems to have a will. It doesn't, but beings viewing time non-linearly appear to be planning when they're simply experiencing causality differently. When Anakin appears as a Force ghost, perhaps he's accessing the world between worlds, visiting his children from outside the normal time stream, present at every moment of their lives simultaneously. In The Phantom Menace, when Darth Maul appears on Tatooine and fights Qui-Gon briefly before escaping, many fans theorize he could have killed Qui-Gon there but was ordered not to by Palpatine. The theory suggests Palpatine wanted Qui-Gon alive long enough to discover and train Anakin, setting events in motion, but not so long that Qui-Gon's wisdom would fully guide the boy. Maul's mission wasn't to kill Jedi, but to track them, to reveal their plans, and eventually to ensure Qui-Gon died at precisely the right moment, after bringing Anakin to the Order, but before properly preparing him for the trials ahead. Some point to how easily Maul dispatches Qui-Gon on Naboo. If he could do that, why not on Tatooine? The theory paints Maul as more than a blunt instrument. He's a precise surgical tool, appearing exactly when Palpatine needs him to nudge events in specific directions. When Maul kills Qui-Gon and falls to Obi-Wan, perhaps that too served Palpatine's design. Maul's apparent death removes a witness to his schemes while testing Obi-Wan's readiness to train the Chosen One poorly. The theory suggests that every move in The Phantom Menace is chess played by Palpatine, with even the film's protagonist unwittingly serving his strategy, dancing on strings so subtle they feel like free will. During The Last Jedi, when Rey and Kylo Ren fight Snoke's guards after killing him, A theory suggests those guards were actually programmed to let Kylo win, ensuring his dominance of the First Order. The fight seems evenly matched, but upon close inspection, some fans notice the guards making tactical errors, leaving openings, hesitating at crucial moments, one even having a weapon disappear from his hand in editing. The theory proposes Snoke anticipated his own death, that perhaps Sith tradition requires the apprentice to eventually strike down the master, and these guards were secretly ordered to put up a convincing fight but ultimately allow Kylo's victory. This would fit Snoke's manipulation. Even his death serves to complete Kylo's corruption, making him believe he's seized power through strength when actually he's still following a script. Some theorize Snoke wanted to die at Kylo's hand, specifically to bind him fully to the dark side through patricide, knowing that killing your master creates a guilt and power that prevents turning back. If true, Snoke's shocked expression when the lightsaber activates might be genuine surprise at the timing, but not the act itself. The theory makes that throne room scene less about heroes winning, and more about puppets cutting strings that were already frayed, with both Rey and Kylo believing they're free while still dancing to dead men's tunes. A wholesome theory about R2-D2 suggests he's secretly the most important character in the entire saga, not through combat or force powers, but through strategic information management. Throughout 9 films, R2 is present at almost every crucial event. He records Padmé's final words, carries the Death Star plans, holds Luke's lightsaber, and maintains decades of data about the galaxy's most important figures. The theory proposes R2 has been actively managing which information gets revealed when, acting as the saga's true chronicler and occasional puppeteer. His selective malfunctions might be calculated, refusing to reveal Luke's location until the exact moment Rey needs it, holding back Vader's identity until Luke can handle the truth, keeping Padmé's recordings secret until the right time for them to matter. Some fans theorize R2 is essentially writing the saga as he goes, a droid historian who understands that information is power, and that revealing truths requires as much wisdom as discovering them. When he shuts down in The Force Awakens, perhaps he's not grieving but thinking, calculating the perfect moment for his archives to matter. The theory makes R2's beeps and boops feel profound. He's not just translating but editorializing, curating history in real time. A tiny blue prophet disguised as a utility droid who has saved the galaxy more times than anyone knows simply by being there, remembering everything, and choosing exactly when to forget. In Attack of the Clones, when Obi-Wan investigates the assassination attempts on Padmé and discovers the clone army, a dark theory suggests he was meant to die on Kamino and only survived through luck and skill. The theory points out how suspicious the whole situation is. A mysterious army ordered by a dead Jedi, ready exactly when needed, with DNA from a bounty hunter connected to both assassination plots. Some fans theorize the entire chain of events was designed to kill Obi-Wan while making it look natural. Jango Fett and the Kaminoans would have eliminated him as a witness, and his death would have kept the clone army's true origins hidden longer. But Obi-Wan's combat skills and Jango's underestimation saved him. The theory makes Obi-Wan's investigation more dangerous retroactively. He wasn't just gathering intelligence but walking into a trap, and his survival derailed part of Palpatine's plan. This would explain why Dooku tries so hard to turn Obi-Wan on Geonosis, offering him truths about the Republic's corruption. Not just recruiting, but improvising after Obi-Wan survived Kamino. If true, the Clone Wars begins with Palpatine having to adapt his scheme around Obi-Wan's continued existence and all subsequent plots involving him become attempts to finish what Kamino failed to do. The theory paints Obi-Wan as more dangerous to the Sith than anyone realizes, not because of power, but because he's impossible to kill cleanly. His survival, a constant thread unraveling carefully woven plans. During The Empire Strikes Back, when Yoda makes Luke promise to pass on what he has learned, many fans theorize Yoda is specifically asking Luke to teach differently than the old Jedi Order. The theory points to Yoda's own failures, training Dooku, who fell, failing to stop Palpatine, missing Anakin's corruption until too late. In his centuries on Dagobah, perhaps Yoda reflected on these failures and realized the Jedi's rules about attachment and emotion created the very darkness they feared. When he trains Luke, he emphasizes feeling the Force, connecting with life, rather than the rigid disciplines the prequel-era Jedi demanded. The theory suggests Yoda's training of Luke is actually an apology and a reformation, teaching a new Jedi way that balances wisdom with compassion, strength with love. This would explain why Luke later accepts that his nephew can love and marry, why he questions Jedi dogma in The Last Jedi, why his final act is one of ultimate compassion rather than combat. If true, Yoda's legacy isn't the thousand-year Jedi Order, but its transformation through Luke into something gentler and more human. When Yoda appears as a Force ghost in The Last Jedi and burns the ancient texts while cackling, he's literally destroying the old ways with joy, telling Luke through action that failure and growth matter more than tradition. The theory makes Yoda's character arc one of the saga's most profound. A figure learning humility across centuries, finally wise enough to admit his order's philosophy needed to die so something better could be born. In Solo, when Han shoots Beckett before Beckett can shoot him, saying, "I was counting on it," about Beckett's betrayal, a theory suggests this is the moment Han truly loses his idealism and becomes the cynical smuggler we meet in A New Hope. Throughout Solo, Han trusts people. Kira, Beckett, even briefly believes in causes bigger than himself. But Beckett's betrayal, coming immediately after Kira's, teaches him that trust is weakness, and everyone has a price. The theory proposes that the kind, heroic Han we see in Solo is who he would have remained if given different mentors and experiences. Instead, he hardens into someone who shoots first and asks questions never, who insists he's only in it for the money even when clearly invested. Some fans point to how quickly Han draws and fires. It's not just self-defense but emotional murder, killing the part of himself that wanted to believe in Beckett as a father figure. If true, this transforms Han's arc in the original trilogy into recovery and redemption rather than discovery of heroism. He doesn't become a hero. He remembers how to be one after years of forcing himself to forget. When Han returns to help Luke at the Death Star, when he risks everything for Leia, he's not changing but reclaiming himself, finding the person Beckett's betrayal buried. The theory makes Solo a tragedy disguised as an adventure, showing us the bright moment before cynicism dims the light. A theory about Jedi robes suggests they're not just cultural garments but Force-sensitive material that helps channel energy and maintain temperature in harsh environments. Throughout the saga, we see Jedi in similar earth-tone robes regardless of planet or climate. Hot Tatooine, frozen Hoth, temperate Naboo. The theory proposes that the robes themselves are woven with techniques that respond to the Force, regulating body temperature and even providing minor protection. Some fans point to how lightsabers cauterize wounds instantly, but Obi-Wan's robe burns when Vader strikes in A New Hope, suggesting unusual material properties. Others note that Force ghosts appear in robes even after death, implying the garments have spiritual significance beyond mere clothing. If true, this explains why Luke adopts the robes despite being raised outside Jedi culture. They're functional equipment, not just tradition. The theory adds a practical magic to the saga's aesthetics. Those flowing robes aren't impractical costuming, but advanced technology disguised as simple fabric. Another example of how Star Wars blends mysticism with science. When Obi-Wan throws back his hood before dueling Vader, perhaps he's not just dramatic but activating the robe's full properties, preparing body and spirit for combat through garments that have helped Jedi survive for millennia. During the Rise of Skywalker, when Rey heals Kylo Ren's lightsaber wound using Force healing, a theory suggests this ability is specifically light side power that cannot be learned through Jedi training but only through genuine compassion. The theory points out that Palpatine claims to teach Anakin to save lives, but we never see Sith use healing. They transfer life force through consumption and domination. Rey's healing feels different, more like giving part of herself willingly. Some fans theorize Force healing requires the user to genuinely care about the person they're healing, making it impossible for Sith who view others as tools. This would explain why Anakin couldn't learn it despite decades trying. His love for Padme was possessive rather than selfless. When Baby Yoda, Grogu, uses Force healing in The Mandalorian, he does so instinctively for people he loves, supporting the theory. If true, this makes Rey's healing of Kylo Ren profoundly significant. She's not just closing a wound, but demonstrating compassion for her enemy, seeing Ben Solo worth saving despite everything Kylo has done. The act itself begins his redemption because it proves love is stronger than hate, that someone believes in him enough to give her own life force freely. The theory transforms Force healing from a new power into a forgotten one, lost when the Jedi became soldiers and forgot that their greatest weapon was always compassion. In The Phantom Menace, when Anakin asks Qui-Gon, "Are you an angel?" some fans theorize this isn't innocent child curiosity, but Anakin unconsciously sensing Qui-Gon's role in his destiny. The theory suggests young Anakin's Force sensitivity allowed him to perceive Qui-Gon as savior and doom simultaneously, calling him an angel because he saw the halo of fate surrounding the Jedi Master. Angels in Star Wars are described as beings from the moons of Iago, but the theory proposes Anakin was referencing the classical meaning: messengers of divine will, beings who herald great change. Qui-Gon brings Anakin freedom and also sets him on the path to becoming Vader. He's both angel of mercy and angel of death. Some point to how reverently Anakin treats Qui-Gon despite being a skeptical child who questions everything else. If true, this makes their first meeting charged with dramatic irony. Anakin recognizes his life is about to change forever, but interprets it as purely good, unable to see that destiny's messengers don't distinguish between salvation and damnation. When Qui-Gon dies, perhaps he takes Anakin's faith with him, creating the wound that Palpatine later exploits. The theory transforms a sweet line into prophecy, suggesting even in their first conversation, the Force was showing both of them the truth in a language too poetic to understand until it was far too late to change anything. A theory about the Force itself suggests it's actually a living organism or ecosystem that spans the entire galaxy, with individual beings as cells in its body. This would explain why Force users can sense disturbances across light years. They're all part of the same organism, feeling pain or joy ripple through its structure. The theory proposes midi-chlorians are like mitochondria, symbiotic organelles that allow cells, beings, to access the larger organisms, the forces, energy, and information. When Yoda says luminous beings are we, not this crude matter, he's describing literal truth. Our bodies are temporary vessels for consciousness that's actually part of the Force's distributed intelligence. This would make death less final. Individuals dissolve back into the Force organism, with strong identities persisting as Force ghosts, the way some cells retain function after clinical death. The theory explains why balance matters. An organism needs equilibrium to survive, and too much dark side is like cancer, cells consuming the whole for individual benefit. If true, the saga becomes a story told from inside a living God's body. With characters as thoughts and emotions in a cosmic mind, there conflicts the Force essentially arguing with itself about the nature of existence. When Anakin brings balance, he's curing the Force's sickness, and when Rey takes the Skywalker name, she's accepting her role as a healthy cell in an organism that nearly died. In The Mandalorian, when Moff Gideon wields the darksaber and seems obsessed with capturing Grogu, a theory suggests he's trying to create Force-sensitive clones combined with Mandalorian warrior culture to build the perfect army. The theory points to how Gideon collects both Grogu's blood, high in midi-chlorians, and Beskar, Mandalorian metal, suggesting he wants to merge Force abilities with Mandalorian combat prowess. Some fans theorize this connects to Palpatine's cloning experiments on Exegol, that Gideon was part of a larger Imperial remnant project to create Force-sensitive soldiers loyal to the Empire. The darksaber in his hands becomes symbolic. He's trying to unite mystical power with martial tradition, creating beings who are both Jedi and Mandalorian. Unstoppable weapons with no moral conflicts. If true, Grogu represents not just a Force-sensitive child, but the key to mass-producing what Anakin Skywalker was. Naturally, powerful warriors. The theory makes Gideon more terrifying than a simple warlord. He's a mad scientist continuing Palpatine's work, and Din Djarin's protection of Grogu isn't just about one child, but about preventing an army of dark Force users encased in Beskar, a nightmare scenario where the galaxy's two most formidable traditions become one horrifying weapon. During A New Hope, when Luke watches the twin suns set on Tatooine before leaving with Obi-Wan, many fans theorize he's unconsciously using the Force to say goodbye to his entire past life. The scene shows Luke in perfect silhouette, absolutely still as John Williams' Force theme swells. The theory suggests this isn't just a beautiful shot, but Luke's first true Force moment. He's reaching out to touch everything he's known, imprinting it in memory through Force connection before stepping into destiny. Some point to how similar this scene is to his final moment in The Last Jedi, watching twin suns again before becoming one with the Force, suggesting bookends of the same technique. If true, Luke has been using the Force instinctively his entire life, and Obi-Wan's training just names what the boy already knows in his blood. The theory adds weight to that iconic moment. It's not just narrative punctuation, but Luke's unconscious goodbye to Aunt Beru, Uncle Owen, his friends, the moisture farm, even the desert itself. Touching everything with the Force one final time before walking away forever. When he looks at those suns, he's not just watching a sunset, but performing his first act of Jedi mindfulness, being fully present with loss and possibility simultaneously, already becoming the hero he doesn't yet know he is. In The Force Awakens, when Finn refuses to execute civilians on Jakku and breaks his stormtrooper conditioning, A compelling theory suggests he's actually Force sensitive, and his empathy is a Force ability manifesting. The theory points out that Finn makes impossible shots, survives situations that should kill him, and most importantly, feels others' pain so intensely he risks everything to avoid causing more. Throughout the sequel trilogy, Finn seems to sense when people are in danger. He knows Rey needs help. He feels the Resistance dying. He has hunches that prove correct. Some fans theorize the First Order's Stormtrooper program includes Force-sensitive children who are suppressed through conditioning, their abilities channeled into loyalty and combat effectiveness. Finn, breaking free, suggests his empathy was too strong to suppress, his Force connection to life overriding programming designed to make him a killer. If true, Finn represents what Jedi could be. Not monks denying attachment, but warriors who fight because they feel everyone's suffering, whose connection to the Force makes them incapable of cruelty. When he tells Rey, "I feel the Force in the rise of Skywalker," he's not discovering it, but finally naming what's been guiding him all along, the reason he could never be the emotionless soldier the First Order wanted. A dark theory about Emperor Palpatine suggests he didn't just manipulate Anakin's fall, but has been doing this for centuries, possessing apprentices and living through multiple bodies over generations. The theory proposes that Palpatine is more like a title or entity than a person, a consciousness that jumps from body to body, accumulating power and knowledge across lifetimes. This would explain his seemingly impossible mastery of every Sith technique, his references to ancient knowledge, his survival in the rise of Skywalker. Some fans point to how Palpatine's face changes after the Mace Windu fight in Revenge of the Sith. Perhaps we're seeing his true, ancient face once the disguise is damaged. The theory suggests every Sith Lord might be this same entity wearing different masks. Darth, not a title, but the name of a possessing consciousness. If true, Rey doesn't just defeat one man, but breaks a cycle thousands of years old, using both Skywalker lightsabers to finally kill something that's been killing its way across the galaxy since before the Republic existed. The theory makes the saga cosmic horror disguised as space opera. The real villain isn't politics or even evil philosophy, but an immortal parasite that wears civilization like clothing, discarding empires when they wear out. When Rey says, "I am all the Jedi," she's countering, "I am all the Sith," not as boast, but as literal truth. One consciousness fighting another across the Force itself. During the Clone Wars series, when Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka encounter the Force priestesses who teach immortality through the Force, a theory suggests these beings are actually the Force's immune system, entities that maintain balance by training Force users in death and rebirth. The theory proposes the Force isn't just an energy field, but has active agents who guide powerful users toward specific destinies. The priestesses appear as glowing, abstract beings who test Yoda's worthiness to learn how to become a Force ghost, suggesting they judge who deserves certain knowledge. Some fans theorize they've been intervening throughout galactic history, appearing to powerful Force users at crucial moments, nudging events toward balance. If true, Qui-Gon Jinn's discovery of Force immortality wasn't his achievement but theirs. They chose him as worthy to carry this knowledge into an era that would need it. The theory makes Force ghosts not just a convenient way to keep dead characters around, but part of the Force's actual plan, creating advisors who can guide the living without interfering directly. When Yoda tells Obi-Wan he has training for him at the end of Revenge of the Sith, he's not just offering comfort, but initiating him into a secret tradition maintained by the Force itself, proving that even in the Jedi's darkest hour, the Force was already preparing for their eventual return. In Return of the Jedi, when Leia tells Luke she's always known they were related, many fans theorize she actually learned this through the Force years earlier, but suppressed the memory because it was too dangerous. The theory suggests Leia's Force sensitivity meant she recognized Luke as family the moment they met, but her conscious mind couldn't process this without interfering with the mission and their developing bond with Han. Some point to how naturally she accepts the truth when Luke tells her. No shock, no denial, just calm. Acknowledgement. If true, this makes Leia's kiss with Luke in Empire Strikes Back more complex. Perhaps she was trying to convince herself they weren't related, fighting knowledge buried deep in her Force connection. The theory proposes Force users sometimes know truths before their conscious minds can accept them. Information filtering up slowly through meditation and crisis. When Leia says, "Somehow I've always known," she's not speaking metaphorically, but describing literal Force knowledge that's been trying to surface for years. The theory adds tragedy to her character. She's been carrying secrets she doesn't consciously know, her Force sensitivity a burden as much as a gift, making her choose between what she senses and what she can prove. When she finally trains with Luke between the trilogies, perhaps she's not learning the Force, but finally allowing herself to know what she's always felt. A wholesome theory about C-3PO suggests his memory wipes throughout the saga aren't cruel violations, but necessary resets that allow him to experience life freshly and maintain his endearing neuroses. In Attack of the Clones, when Anakin rebuilds him, 3PO is already anxious and protocol-focused. The theory proposes that protocol droids are designed to accumulate social data endlessly, and without periodic wipes, they'd become jaded or depressed by the galaxy's cruelty. By wiping his memory, his friends are actually protecting his innocence, allowing him to wake up new and worried rather than old and bitter. Some fans point to how 3PO maintains consistent personality across memory wipes. His core programming, his soul, persists while traumatic data is removed. If true, this makes his sacrifice in The Rise of Skywalker profound. He's not just losing memories, but choosing to experience death, to go into darkness for his friends, knowing he'll wake different on the other side. When R2 restores his memory later, perhaps it's not complete restoration, but enough to bring back his essential self, his friendship with R2, his love for his organic companions. The theory transforms memory wipes from plot convenience to mercy, suggesting that sometimes forgetting is kindness, that starting fresh is a gift rather than a theft, and that who we are persists deeper than memory alone. During The Phantom Menace, when Qui-Gon tells the Jedi Council about the Sith returning after 1,000 years of absence, a theory suggests the Sith never actually left, but have been hiding in plain sight within the Senate itself. The theory points to how perfectly Palpatine's plan unfolds, how thoroughly he understands Jedi weaknesses, how many allies he has in place when Order 66 activates. Some fans theorize generations of Sith have been infiltrating Republic government, creating a shadow empire inside democracy itself, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. If true, the Sith's return isn't them coming back, but them revealing themselves, stepping from behind bureaucratic masks into open conflict. This would explain the Jedi's failure to sense them. They were looking for warriors in the shadows, not politicians in the light. The theory makes Palpatine's rise feel less like genius, and more like the culmination of centuries of patient work, thousands of Sith agents positioning themselves across the galaxy, building the machine that would destroy the Jedi from within. When Palpatine declares himself Emperor, he's not seizing power, but revealing power that's been there all along, hidden in senatorial robes and trade agreements, darkness masquerading as bureaucracy until the moment it could safely shed the disguise. In Solo, when Han meets Chewbacca in an Imperial prison pit, and they immediately bond, fighting off other prisoners together, a theory suggests Chewie recognized Han as someone important through Force sensitivity, or Wookiee mysticism. The theory points out that Wookiees have their own connection to nature and life force, different from Jedi training but real nonetheless. Some fans theorize Chewbacca saw potential in Han, recognized that this particular human was destined for significance, and chose to ally with him based on visions or intuition. If true, the legendary friendship between Han and Chewie begins not just with mutual survival, but with Chewbacca making a deliberate choice to follow this smuggler through whatever adventures await. This would explain Chewie's absolute loyalty across decades. He's not just repaying a life debt, but fulfilling a spiritual recognition that Han Solo matters to the galaxy's fate. When Chewbacca howls in grief at Han's death, perhaps he's mourning not just a friend, but the future he saw so clearly when they met. The heroic path Han took that Chewie knew he would from the moment they stood back to back against the darkness. The theory makes their friendship mythic rather than coincidental, suggesting that some bonds are written in the Force itself, that Chewbacca chose Han as much as Han freed Chewbacca. A theory about lightsaber colors suggests they reflect not just the crystal's attunement, but the wielder's relationship with destiny itself. Blue represents those who actively shape destiny: Luke, Anakin, Obi-Wan. Green represents those who trust destiny to unfold: Yoda, Qui-Gon. Red represents those who fight destiny: Sith, who bleed crystals through rejection of the Force's will. And purple represents those who walk between: Mace Windu, using dark side techniques for light side purposes. The theory proposes kyber crystals are actually crystallized Force energy that responds to philosophical stance, not just dark or light alignment. This would explain why Rey's final lightsaber is yellow. She represents a new philosophy, neither Jedi nor Sith. Someone who understands destiny but isn't bound by it. Some fans point to how Ahsoka's white lightsabers, purified from red crystals, represent redemption and neutrality. If true, the lightsaber becomes a philosophical statement, each color a declaration of how that Force user approaches existence itself. When a Padawan constructs their first lightsaber, they're not just making a weapon, but answering the question of who they are in relation to fate. The theory transforms lightsabers from cool sci-fi weapons into mandala-like expressions of individual philosophy, each blade a visible manifestation of invisible beliefs about free will, destiny, and the nature of moral choice. During The Last Jedi, when Rose Tico saves Finn from sacrificing himself against the battering ram cannon, telling him, "We win not by fighting what we hate, but by saving what we love," many fans theorize she's unconsciously channeling Force wisdom that will become central to future Jedi philosophy. The theory suggests Rose, though not Force-sensitive in traditional ways, understands the Force's true nature better than trained users, that it serves love and protection rather than combat prowess. Some point to how this statement directly refutes both Jedi and Sith approaches, offering a third path based purely on compassion. If true, Rose represents the ordinary people whose wisdom shaped what the Jedi eventually became, proving that Force sensitivity isn't required to understand the Force philosophically. The theory gained weight when the rise of Skywalker showed Rey healing and sacrificing for others, rather than destroying enemies. She's enacting Rose's philosophy. When Rose kisses Finn, perhaps it's not just romantic gesture, but her recognizing something important in him, offering love as an alternative to heroic death. The theory transforms a controversial scene into mission statement for the sequel trilogy's deeper themes, suggesting the saga's ultimate wisdom comes not from powerful Force users, but from ordinary people like Rose, who understand that love is stronger than any power, that salvation matters more than victory. In Attack of the Clones, when Anakin confesses to Padme that he killed the Tusken Raiders who tortured his mother, not just the men, but the women and children too. A dark theory suggests Padme secretly uses the Force unconsciously, and sensed his confession might lead to their doom. Throughout the prequels, Padme shows impossible political instincts, survives multiple assassination attempts through luck that feels supernatural, and maintains composure in situations that should break her. The theory proposes she has low-level Force sensitivity she's unaware of, manifesting as intuition and presence. When Anakin confesses his massacre, perhaps Padme's Force sense screamed warnings about their future, but her love overrode her survival instinct. Some fans point to how Padme loses the will to live in Revenge of the Sith. Perhaps her Force connection showed her exactly what Anakin would become, and that knowledge killed her as surely as any physical wound. If true, Padme's tragedy deepens. She had the ability to sense danger but chose love anyway, walking consciously into disaster because she believed love could heal darkness. When she tells Anakin, "You're breaking my heart," she might be describing not just emotional pain but Force knowledge, her nascent abilities showing her their entire terrible future in that moment, seeing the Empire and Vader and her own death, yet still choosing to love him anyway, because that's what the light side would do. A theory about the Jedi Temple on Coruscant suggests it was deliberately built over a Sith shrine, and this proximity to dark side energy slowly corrupted the entire Jedi Order over centuries. In the Clone Wars, it's revealed the temple sits atop an ancient Sith location, with Sith artifacts hidden in its foundations. The theory proposes this wasn't accident, but sabotage. Ancient Sith allowed the temple's construction knowing it would poison Jedi philosophy over generations. If true, the dogmatic, emotionally repressed Jedi of the prequel era aren't failing their own philosophy, but acting out Sith corruption absorbed through architecture itself. Some fans point to how the temple's spires reach upward, while roots dig into darkness, suggesting physical metaphor for the Order's spiritual state. The theory explains why Jedi become less effective over time. They're literally meditating on top of a dark side wound, thinking they're drawing on light but actually slowly absorbing shadow. When Anakin storms the temple as Vader, perhaps the dark side recognizes him and welcomes him, the building itself complicit in its own destruction. The theory makes the temple's fall feel inevitable, suggesting the Jedi were defeated before they began simply by choosing to build their home on cursed ground. Another example of how pride blinds even the wise. In The Mandalorian, when Bo-Katan rejects Din Djarin's offer of the dark saber, citing that it must be won in combat to hold legitimacy, a theory suggests this tradition is what keeps Mandalorians in endless cycles of violence. The theory proposes that Mandalorian culture's emphasis on combat prowess for leadership ensures only warriors rule, preventing philosophers, diplomats, or healers from ever guiding their people toward peace. Some fans theorize this tradition was deliberately created or encouraged by external forces, perhaps ancient Sith or even the Republic, to keep Mandalorians divided and warring amongst themselves, rather than uniting to threaten the wider galaxy. If true, every time the Darksaber changes hands through violence, Mandalorians reinforce the very pattern that destroyed their homeworld. The theory gained weight when Season 3 explored Mandalore's fractured clans and competing visions for rebuilding. When Din Djarin eventually accepts the Darksaber's burden, perhaps he'll transform this tradition, proving legitimacy through protection and sacrifice rather than combat victory. The theory suggests that cultural traditions can become traps, that honoring ancestors sometimes means evolving beyond them, and that true strength might be breaking cycles rather than continuing them. During The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke enters the dark side cave on Dagobah and fights a vision of Vader with his own face beneath the mask, a theory suggests this isn't just metaphor, but literal prophecy. Luke sees the future where he becomes Vader's successor. The theory points out that in Return of the Jedi, Luke dresses in black, nearly kills Vader in anger, and comes within moments of joining Palpatine. His vision on Dagobah showed him this exact path, warning him where anger and fear lead. Some fans theorize the cave showed him multiple possible futures, and he saw himself as both Vader's destroyer and his replacement. If true, every choice Luke makes afterward is haunted by this knowledge, his entire journey in Jedi informed by trying to avoid the dark future he saw in his own eyes beneath Vader's mask. When he throws away his lightsaber before Palpatine, perhaps he's consciously choosing the one path his vision didn't show: nonviolence, acceptance of death rather than giving in to hate. The theory makes the cave scene prophetic rather than just psychological, suggesting the dark side cave doesn't just reflect internal struggles, but shows actual possible futures, warning those wise enough to understand its visions. A fascinating theory about hyperspace accidents suggests that the reason nobody flies through hyperspace blindly is because ships occasionally phase into alternate dimensions or timelines. In A New Hope, Han explains that flying through a star or supernova would be bad, but the theory proposes the real danger is dimensional drift. Ships that jump without proper calculations sometimes arrive in mirror universes or alternate timelines. This would explain why Navy computers are so crucial and why established hyperspace lanes are precious. Some fans theorize there are ghost ships floating in hyperspace forever, crews that jumped wrong and passed through into alternate realities, trapped between dimensions. If true, this adds cosmic horror to hyperspace travel. Every jump is a calculated risk of not just physical collision, but dimensional displacement. The theory explains why the Holdo maneuver in The Last Jedi is so unprecedented. Deliberately ramming at hyperspace speed doesn't just cause physical damage, but tears reality itself, which is why it's never used as standard warfare. The collateral damage could ripple across dimensions. When ships jump to hyperspace and stars stretch into lines, perhaps we're watching them briefly phase through infinite parallel galaxies before emerging in our own. The blue tunnel of light actually a journey through the multiverse. In Rogue One, when Galen Erso designs a fatal flaw into the Death Star and uses an Imperial pilot to smuggle the message to Saw Gerrera's rebels, a theory suggests he'd been sabotaging Imperial projects for years before this. The theory points out that Galen was the Empire's top weapons scientist. Imagine how many other projects he could have subtly undermined with undetectable flaws. Some fans theorize the Empire's technology should be far more advanced than it is, that Galen and other conscripted scientists engaged in quiet resistance through bad engineering, delays, and hidden weaknesses. If true, the Death Star's thermal exhaust port isn't unique, but the culmination of years of scientific sabotage, and the Empire's eventual defeat owes as much to these invisible heroes as to the rebellion's fighters. The theory makes Galen even more heroic. His entire career after being forced to work for the Empire was one long act of resistance, every blueprint containing tiny seeds of failure. When he says, "I've placed a weakness deep within the system," he's not just talking about the Death Star, but describing his entire life's work under Imperial rule, placing weakness after weakness, hoping someday rebels would find them. The theory celebrates passive resistance and the power of small acts of defiance that accumulate over years into catastrophic failure for tyrants. During The Force Awakens, when Poe Dameron is captured by the First Order and Kylo Ren interrogates him, a theory suggests Poe is actually unconsciously Force-resistant, which is why Kylo struggles to extract information from him. The theory points to Poe's absurd piloting skills, his luck, his ability to inspire absolute loyalty, and, most tellingly, his resistance to Force interrogation. Most prisoners break immediately when Kylo invades their minds, but Poe holds out long enough to banter and resist. Some fans theorize that exceptional pilots might have latent Force sensitivity that enhances reflexes and intuition while also providing natural mental shields. If true, this explains why Poe survived situations that killed other pilots, why he always seems to be exactly where the Resistance needs him, why Leia trusts him so completely. When Kylo finally does extract the information, perhaps it took far more effort than it should have, leaving Kylo frustrated and underestimating Poe's importance. The theory makes Poe more than just a skilled pilot. He's someone the Force touches lightly. Not enough for traditional Jedi training, but enough to make him extraordinary. A new type of Force user for a new era. A theory about the Starforge, an ancient space station from Legends continuity that some fans hope will return to canon, suggests it was actually a prototype Death Star built by Rakata species using Force-driven technology. The theory proposes that Palpatine discovered Rakata records and reverse-engineered their world-destroying superweapons, making the Death Star not original Imperial innovation, but archaeology weaponized. Some fans point to similarities between Rakata architectural styles seen in games and the Death Star's design. If true, this means superweapons have plagued the galaxy for thousands of years, that each civilization eventually discovers the power to destroy worlds and must choose whether to use it. The theory connects the sequel trilogy's Final Order fleet to this pattern. Palpatine spending decades searching for ancient superweapon technology, finding it in forgotten corners of the galaxy, building toward the ultimate expression of power through destruction. When the Resistance destroys the Death Star, Starkiller base, and finally the Sith fleet, they're not just defeating the Empire but breaking a cycle as old as civilization itself, proving that this time, finally, the galaxy chose differently than every previous civilization that held world-ending power in their hands. In The Last Jedi, when Luke milks a sea creature on Ahch-To and drinks the green milk while staring at Rey with a challenging expression, many fans theorize this is Luke testing whether Rey can handle his disillusionment. The scene seems bizarre and uncomfortable, and that's precisely the point. The theory suggests Luke is deliberately behaving in ways that should disappoint Rey, trying to shatter her hero worship so she'll leave. If she came seeking the legendary Luke Skywalker, he'll show her the broken hermit until she stops asking for training. Some fans point to how this mirrors Yoda's behavior in Empire Strikes Back, acting foolish and difficult to test Luke's patience and seriousness. If true, Luke's entire performance on Ahch-To is calculated to drive Rey away for her own protection, and every bizarre action is him probing whether she'll give up easily. When she doesn't, when she stays despite his deliberate provocations, he begins to respect her strength. The theory transforms the scene from awkward humor into sophisticated character work. Luke hasn't lost his heroism, but buried it under layers of trauma and self-loathing, and he's testing whether Rey has the stubbornness to dig through those layers. When he finally agrees to teach her, it's because she passed tests he never explained, proving through persistence that she deserves the truth beneath his performance of brokenness. A theory about Order 66 suggests that some Jedi knew it was coming, but chose to die rather than fight their own troops. The theory points to how quickly Jedi fall during the Purge. Masters who survived decades of combat cut down without defending themselves properly. Some fans theorize these Jedi sensed their clones' distress as the inhibitor chips activated, felt their soldiers' anguish at being forced to kill their generals, and chose not to make it worse by killing the clones to save themselves. If true, this makes Order 66 even more tragic. Some Jedi died as one final act of compassion, accepting betrayal rather than betraying in return. The theory explains why Obi-Wan and Yoda survive. They were among the few who didn't hesitate to defend themselves, who prioritized survival over mercy in that crucial moment. When we see Jedi cut down throughout Revenge of the Sith, perhaps some of those deaths are deliberate martyrdom. Masters choosing to fall so their troops wouldn't have to live with the memory of their general fighting back. The theory adds complexity to the Jedi's final moments, suggesting their flaw wasn't weakness, but an excess of compassion, loving their soldiers too much to survive at the cost of their clones' psychological destruction. During Solo, when Qi'ra reveals she's been working for Maul and the Crimson Dawn Syndicate, a theory suggests she's actually a deep-cover rebel spy who infiltrated the criminal underworld years ago. The theory points out that Qi'ra shows sophisticated combat skills and political cunning far beyond what street criminals learn. Some fans theorize she deliberately left Han on Corellia, knowing he'd be better off escaping without her, and her entire criminal career has been gathering intelligence and resources for the eventual rebellion. If true, this makes her betrayal of Voss and her call to Maul strategic moves in a deeper game. She's positioning herself higher in the criminal hierarchy to access better intelligence. The theory would explain why we never see Qi'ra in later films. Perhaps she died doing spy work for the rebellion, or perhaps she's still out there in deep cover, her contributions to the Alliance invisible but crucial. When she tells Han, "I'm not who you think I am," she's speaking literal truth. He thinks she's a criminal, but she's actually a hero forced to do terrible things for a greater cause. The theory transforms her character from tragic love interest into espionage hero, suggesting some rebels fight not with blasters but with deception, living double lives in service to freedom. A wholesome theory about the Force suggests it's actually powered by stories and belief rather than midi-chlorians generating it. The theory proposes that Force users draw power from the galaxy's collective narrative consciousness, the stories people tell about Jedi and Sith across thousands of worlds. This would explain why the Force seems stronger when Jedi are legendary and weaker when they're forgotten. In The Last Jedi, Luke's final act spreads across the galaxy as story, inspiring people. The theory suggests this literally strengthens the Force itself, making it easier for future Force users to access power, because Luke created a story people believe in. Some fans point to the young boy at the end of Last Jedi using the Force to grab a broom, not because of genetic midi-chlorians, but because he believes in the story he just heard. If true, the Force is participatory, strengthened by collective faith and myth-making. When Rey declares herself all the Jedi, she's not just claiming lineage, but invoking every story ever told about Jedi heroism, drawing on the galaxy's collective memory and hope. The theory makes the Star Wars saga meta-textual. The story's characters tell about each other within the films create the power those characters wield, meaning the saga is literally about the power of storytelling to shape reality, a myth that creates itself through believing. In The Phantom Menace, when Boss Nass gives Jar Jar Binks to Qui-Gon as a guide, claiming Jar Jar owes him a life debt, a theory suggests Boss Nass is actually protecting Jar Jar from political enemies by getting him off Naboo. The theory points out that Gungans seem to genuinely dislike Jar Jar beyond normal annoyance. Perhaps he witnessed something or became entangled in political intrigue that made him a liability. By giving him to the Jedi under cover of a life debt, Boss Nass ensures Jar Jar disappears from Gungan society while maintaining honor. If true, Jar Jar's clumsiness might be partly performance, a way to seem harmless and incompetent to avoid threats. When Boss Nass later accepts the Naboo Queen's alliance, perhaps he's relieved to reintegrate Jar Jar now that whatever danger existed has passed. The theory adds depth to Gungan culture and makes Boss Nass more complex, not just a stubborn leader, but someone playing political chess to protect his people, even the annoying ones. When Jar Jar becomes a senator, perhaps he's actually far more politically savvy than he appears, his earlier bumbling a survival strategy in a society where competence could get you killed. The theory doesn't make Jar Jar a Sith Lord as the famous meme suggests, but it does make him more interesting than simple comic relief. During the Clone Wars series, when Ahsoka encounters the Sun on Mortis, and he shows her a vision of her dark future, a theory suggests she actually died there, and everything after is a Force-gifted second life. In the vision, Ahsoka sees herself as an old woman surrounded by death and despair. The theory proposes that when the Father erases everyone's memories of Mortis, he's actually resetting reality itself, giving them all second chances after they died in that dimension outside normal space-time. If true, Ahsoka's entire arc after Mortis, leaving the Order, surviving Order 66, fighting the Empire, mentoring Sabine, is bonus time. Life lived on borrowed moments. This would explain her unusual wisdom and perspective. She's operating with unconscious knowledge of having died once already, making her less afraid of death and more focused on living meaningfully. When she fights Vader and rebels and survives through the world between worlds, perhaps she's dying a second time and being saved again. The Force repeatedly refusing to let her pass because her story isn't finished. The theory makes Ahsoka mythic. A hero who has died and returned so many times she exists partially outside normal causality, walking between life and death as easily as she walks between light and dark. A theory about lightsaber forms suggests that Form 7, Yuyo Va'apad, the aggressive style Mace Windu uses, was actually designed to turn Jedi into Sith, and that Mace is unconsciously falling to the dark side throughout the prequels. The theory points out that Form 7 requires channeling aggression and even hatred, using dark side emotions for combat. Some fans note how angry Mace appears when fighting, scowling, aggressive, almost eager for violence. If true, his purple lightsaber isn't just aesthetic but warning sign, showing someone balanced on the edge between light and dark. The theory explains why Mace seems so eager to kill Palpatine without trial. Form 7 has been slowly corrupting him for years, making him think he's using the dark side when it's actually using him. When Anakin stops Mace from killing Palpatine, perhaps he's unknowingly saving the Jedi from completing his own fall. If Mace had murdered Palpatine in cold blood, he might have turned fully dark. The theory darkly suggests the Jedi's martial culture corrupted even their best, that creating combat forms which channel dark emotions guaranteed eventual corruption, and that Mace's fate was sealed the moment he chose to master the most dangerous lightsaber form. In The Mandalorian, when Din Djarin sees other Mandalorians remove their helmets casually and realizes his sect's beliefs aren't universal, a theory suggests this moment is the most important in his arc, learning that tradition is interpretation, not immutable truth. The theory proposes Din's character represents fundamentalism, and his journey is about discovering that cultures evolve, and that honoring ancestors doesn't mean frozen imitation of their ways. Some fans point to how liberating his character becomes after accepting that removing his helmet doesn't make him less Mandalorian. If true, Din's arc mirrors real-world de-radicalization, learning that your strict upbringing wasn't the one true way, but one path among many. When he removes his helmet to say goodbye to Grogu, he's not breaking his creed, but transcending it, discovering that the spirit of Mandalorian values matters more than literal rule-following. The theory makes The Mandalorian quietly radical, a show about a fundamentalist learning tolerance and nuance without abandoning his core identity. When Din eventually takes the dark saber and potentially becomes Mandalore's leader, perhaps he'll unite the clans by teaching that diversity of practice strengthens rather than weakens culture, that Mandalorians can honor the same ancestors through different traditions. A chilling theory about the Clone Wars suggests Palpatine deliberately prolonged the conflict beyond military necessity to maximize Jedi deaths and corruption. The theory points out that the Separatists could have been defeated much faster if the Republic committed its full resources, but instead the war drags on for years. Some fans theorize Palpatine manipulated both sides to keep the war in perpetual stalemate, forcing Jedi to serve as generals and make command decisions that would erode their moral foundations. Every year of war produces more acceptable war crimes, more pragmatic compromises, more Jedi becoming comfortable with violence and political power. If true, Order 66 was almost unnecessary by the end. The Jedi Order had already hollowed itself out through 3 years of warfare. The theory explains why the Jedi seem so depleted in Revenge of the Sith even before the Purge begins. They're morally exhausted, spiritually corrupted by becoming exactly what they swore never to be: warriors. When Mace Windu says the dark side clouds everything, perhaps he's unconsciously describing the Jedi themselves. They've become so darkened by war, they can't recognize their own corruption. The theory makes the Clone Wars Palpatine's masterpiece not through any single brilliant strategy, but through patient, systematic destruction of his enemies' souls before their bodies. During A New Hope, when Obi-Wan gives Luke his father's lightsaber and says, "Your father wanted you to have this when you were old enough," a theory suggests Obi-Wan is lying, and Anakin never said any such thing. The theory points out that Anakin turned to the dark side before learning about Luke's birth. so he couldn't have left instructions about his children. Some fans theorize Obi-Wan invented this story to give Luke a connection to his father, a noble lie to help the boy accept his Jedi destiny. If true, this makes Obi-Wan's deceptions throughout A New Hope more complex. He's not just hiding uncomfortable truths, but actively constructing mythology to manipulate Luke toward necessary choices. When Obi-Wan tells Luke that Vader betrayed and murdered your father, he's creating a psychologically useful fiction that allows Luke to become a Jedi without the burden of his father's actual identity. The theory suggests Obi-Wan learned from his failure with Anakin that sometimes truth must be parceled out carefully, that some lies serve love better than honesty. When Luke learns the truth in Empire Strikes Back, perhaps Obi-Wan's ghost accepts judgment for his deceptions, understanding that they were necessary evils, that protecting Luke's innocence required lying to him, and that some truths should wait until we're strong enough to bear their weight. In The Rise of Skywalker, when Rey and Kylo Ren fight on the Death Star ruins surrounded by raging ocean, a theory suggests the dark side nexus of the fallen superweapon is amplifying their conflict, making them more violent than they'd otherwise be. The theory points out that the Death Star destroyed Alderaan and millions of beings, creating a concentration of death and suffering that would linger in the Force. Fighting in this location means both Rey and Kylo are channeling residual dark side energy, explaining their viciousness. Some fans theorize locations in Star Wars retain Force signatures. Battlefields stay violent, peaceful temples stay serene, and that strong Force users unconsciously channel these environmental energies. If true, Rey and Kylo's hatred on Kefir isn't fully their own, but includes the echoes of everyone who died when the Death Star fired. Every Imperial officer who served aboard it. Every bit of cruelty the Ihe station represented. When Leia reaches out through the Force at that moment to call to Ben, perhaps she's not just reaching across distance, but across the dark side interference itself. Her love powerful enough to penetrate the Death Star's lingering malevolence. The theory adds environmental storytelling to Force philosophy. The places we fight shape how we fight, and returning to sites of atrocity means wrestling not just with present conflicts, but with history's accumulated darkness. A theory about Yoda's species suggests they're actually semi-immortal beings who live thousands of years, and that Yoda and Grogu are the same person at different points in a time loop. The theory proposes that Grogu will eventually travel back in time, becoming the Yoda we know from the original trilogy, explaining why Yoda's species is so mysterious. There's only one individual experiencing non-linear time. Some fans point to physical similarities, Force abilities, and personality quirks that mirror each other. If true, this would explain why Yoda seems to know so much about future events, why he's so wise despite the Jedi's blindness. He's lived through all of this before in an eternal loop. When Yoda tells Luke there is another, perhaps he's remembering being Grogu, remembering being trained by this same Skywalker family across different timelines. The theory is wild but poetic, suggesting that Grogu's entire journey, including his choice of Din Djarin over Luke, is predestined because he's already lived it as Yoda, and he's choosing love again in the hope that this time the loop might break, and he can finally experience linear time. When Yoda dies, perhaps he's returning to his younger self, waking up in a Jedi temple on Coruscant, ready to live another 1,000 years toward the same destination. During The Force Awakens, when Han Solo walks onto the bridge to confront Kylo Ren, and you can see doubt and pain in Kylo's face as he holds the lightsaber, A theory suggests Kylo actually wanted Han to stop him, wanted his father to fight back or drag him away, anything but acceptance. The theory points out that Kylo seems genuinely conflicted, and when Han touches his face with love instead of anger, it breaks something in Ben Solo. He realizes his father won't save him from himself, that he has to make this choice alone. Some fans theorize Kylo expected rejection or combat, and Han's unconditional love in the face of death was actually what pushed him fully dark. The realization that his father loved him enough to die rather than fight, which made Ben's guilt unbearable and converted it to rage. If true, the bridge scene is Kylo desperately hoping to be stopped and instead being loved, which his dark side corrupted mind interprets as weakness rather than strength. When he ignites the lightsaber, perhaps he's not just killing his father, but killing his last hope of being saved against his will, accepting that he has to choose darkness actively rather than being pulled into it passively. The theory makes Han's death simultaneously his greatest act of love and his final tragedy. He offers Ben exactly what he needs emotionally, but not what he needs to avoid falling completely. In Revenge of the Sith, when Padme tells Anakin, "You're breaking my heart," on Mustafar before he force chokes her, a theory suggests she actually dies at that moment, and the medical droid's report of a broken heart later is literal truth. The theory proposes that Anakin, fully consumed by darkseid and enraged at her bringing Obi-Wan, accidentally or deliberately uses the Force to stop her heart rather than just choking her. When the medical droids say they can't explain her death, that she's lost the will to live, they're confused because Force damage doesn't show on medical scans. If true, Anakin murders Padme directly, not indirectly through heartbreak, making his fall even more complete. He kills the one thing he turned to the dark side to save. Some fans point to Palpatine's line, "It seems in your anger you killed her," as more truthful than Anakin believes. The theory explains the medical mystery. It's not depression, but Force trauma. Anakin's rage literally crushing her heart from within. When Padme whispers, "There's good in him," with her dying breath, perhaps she's clinging to hope even as she feels him killing her, knowing the man she loved did this, yet still believing that man exists somewhere beneath Vader's hatred. The theory makes Anakin's transformation complete on Mustafar. He doesn't just lose his humanity symbolically, but commits the exact murder he feared, becoming the thing he most dreaded. A theory about the resistance in the sequel trilogy suggests it's actually illegal or semi-legal because the New Republic officially demilitarized after defeating the Empire. The theory points out that Leia seems to operate outside official channels, that she's leading a resistance while a republic exists, which makes no sense unless she's resisting her own government's pacifism. Some fans theorize the New Republic's Senate refused to believe the First Order was a threat and legally prohibited military buildup, forcing Leia to create an off-books militia. If true, this explains why the resistance is so small and why the galaxy doesn't immediately rally to help them. Legally, they're vigilantes, and many worlds see them as warmongers refusing to accept peace. The theory makes The Force Awakens more politically complex. The Resistance isn't the underdog rebellion fighting tyranny, but a controversial fringe group whose warnings about the First Order were dismissed as paranoia until it was too late. When the New Republic is destroyed, perhaps it validates Leia's warnings, but also eliminates any legal framework for organizing defense, leaving the galaxy in chaos. The theory transforms the sequel trilogy from simple good versus evil into a story about the price of peace, the dangers of disarmament, and the tragedy, of being right when everyone needs you to be wrong. During the Clone Wars series, when Darth Maul returns with cybernetic legs and consumed by thoughts of Obi-Wan Kenobi, a theory suggests his hatred is what kept him alive for years on a junk planet, that the dark side literally wouldn't let him die until he got revenge. The theory points to how insane Maul appears when found, talking to himself about Kenobi, his mind shattered, except for that one burning purpose. Some fans theorize the dark side is like a virus that needs strong emotions to survive, and Maul's hatred was so intense it infected his very cells, keeping tissue alive and growing cybernetic replacements from junk through unconscious force manipulation. If true, Maul is essentially a dark side zombie, a being who should have died but whose hate was too intense to allow death. This would explain his seemingly supernatural durability, surviving bisection, surviving crashes, surviving everything because the Force itself refuses to release him until his purpose is complete. When Maul finally dies in Rebels after confronting Obi-Wan one last time, perhaps it's not just the lightsaber wound but the dark side finally letting go, his purpose fulfilled, his hatred spent. The theory makes Maul tragic rather than evil, a being transformed into a living weapon by his own emotions, puppeted by the dark side for decades, unable to find peace or death until his torment completes its cycle. In The Mandalorian, when the darksaber feels heavy in Din Djarin's hand, but light when he's defending Grogu, a theory suggests the blade responds to the wielder's intention. It's heavy when used for power and light when used for protection. The theory points to Mandalorian legends about the darksaber choosing its wielder based on worthiness. Some fans theorize the blade is semi-sentient, or connected to Mandalore's spirit, judging those who hold it. If true, Din struggles with the darksaber not because he lacks skill, but because he's conflicted about leadership. The blade senses his doubt and becomes heavy with responsibility. When he fights to protect Grogu, his intention is pure, and the blade recognizes this, becoming light and responsive. The theory explains why so many Mandalorian leaders throughout history fell. The darksaber was testing them, and most failed, wielding it for personal glory rather than their people's protection. If Din eventually masters the blade, it won't be through combat training but through accepting leadership not as power, but as service, transforming his relationship with the weapon from burden to partnership. The theory makes the darksaber's legendary status literal. It's not just a symbol, but a test, and only those who pass can truly wield it, ensuring that Mandalore's leader is chosen by the blade itself through spiritual rather than martial criteria.